in these times that we're living in right now, a lot of props are being taken out from under our feet, at least where I am. And I'm sure from what I read and gather, many places in the world right now. I used to go traveling here and there because life was normal. But when you can't get gasoline and all these props that you were leaning on and doing, now they're talking about food shortages and depression and bad. Even the news media, everybody's talking about all this is to come. Well, this is just the beginning of sorrows. But when you have the Lord, if everything else is stripped out from underneath you and you still love the Lord, you'll get along fine. Do you remember, who was it, Elijah, where the ravens fed him? The animals brought him food. The Lord's going to take care of you in days of famine. All of those stories are put in the Word of God to increase your faith, but you'll have nowhere to go but the Lord.
And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. I'm going to stop right there. This is where we first hear about this bottomless pit, and we're going to see a number of terrible things come out and go into it also. Do you have any thoughts on what this is? What is this bottomless pit?
In all honesty, I'm looking forward to you telling me what it's all about. I think you might have more insight on it than myself. But yeah, I'd like to know what you think.
Well, I know there's kind of a theme. We see Peter touch on it in his epistle, and we see it touched on in Revelation, of these very wicked spiritual entities that are kind of bound in the earth and are let out. And Peter refers to it having something to do with the flood. There's kind of this idea that the flood in Noah's time, some very wicked entities were bound in the earth. And at the end, they are kind of let out. And we're even going to see the beast, who we call Antichrist. The beast itself comes out of this bottomless pit. I think there's something to do with entities that are physically bound in the earth, perhaps from back in Noah's time.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, so let's see what comes out of it here. This is our first mention of this bottomless pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of woman, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. I know there's stories about the ancient pre-flood times and the kind of things that the earth suffered in those times. I think you're familiar with some of that, aren't you? Some of those stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've studied the Book of Enoch quite a bit, the Book of Jashar, the Book of Jubilees, and different other books. And pre-flood, that must have been amazing what happened up until the time of Noah. Very spiritual times, because this is where the angels rebelled against God, the fallen angels, and it names them in the book of Enoch. And boy, do they get a punishment. The Lord really loves obedience. He can't put up with disobedience. That's scary stuff. So sometime in your little temper tantrum or rebelliousness, you might do that. But if you do that, you'll learn a lesson you'll never forget. I guarantee it. You'll learn a lesson you will never forget. And if you do forget, you are dumb, really dumb.
I'm not really familiar with those writings, but I know you've read some of them, and whether they are accurate or not, that does at least tell us that the ancient Jews had these ideas about what was going on before the flood. It does tell us in Genesis 6 that it gives us this little glimpse into how terrible the earth was. It goes from the angels coming down to earth, and then things get very wicked very fast, and it said the whole world was filled with violence, and like everyone's thoughts were just full of violence and corruption. So I think there's a lot that we just kind of have to read between the lines. But the fact that in the end times, these very frightening kind of wicked entities here in chapter 9 are coming up out of the earth. I think it shows us that maybe the ancient Jewish writings about those pre-flood times, maybe there's something to them, something that was going on with these kinds of creatures.
Like right now on the earth, you could see the evil in certain situations in the world, in these decision making with baby killing and all this insanity. The world's going to go insane. And I've seen it, how insane the world could go. Of course, I'm not saying I've seen it all, but I've seen enough to say, whoa, what's going on here? What's happening? And the thing is, I'm not the only one. A lot of people see it. A lot of people. You go onto YouTube and you see people, they see it. There's some, look, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places. You could see the spiritual wickedness maneuvering and trying to take over and trying to control God's people, trying to control the world. And God's people are fighting back because in the spirit, and some in the flesh, in the carnal, which isn't really a good advice because Jesus said not to do that. But some people, like Peter, he's going to take a sword and cut off the servant of the high priest's ear. And there's people out there that do love the Lord, but yet they'd rather go down fighting than just be slaughtered. And these are decisions that are going to come up in people's life, but it does say that the beast shall make war with the saints. So what kind of war? I don't know, but it's for me, the war is a spiritual warfare, even though it takes on a physical form out there. And there's always temptation for people to try to solve the problem in the flesh, but it's not going to work.
One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them.
200 million.
Right, yes. So the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, these sound to me like evil entities. I don't know, what do you think about that?
You know what? It reminds me of the movie Superman. Remember when those evil forces were put into that container of that glass thing? They were like impregnated into the glass, and
Yeah.
that was their captive. They were captive. They could, but somehow I forgot. But they got loose again,
Hmm.
and they came back to really screw up Superman and try to destroy the earth and the people in it. They were evil dudes.
So that's what it sounds like here. We're seeing these beings being referred to even as angels, but they are bound up in the earth and they do terrible things on the earth. So again, I'm thinking about the flood and that catastrophic event where the whole earth is just liquefied and everything is just buried under billions of tons of stone and earth and water, and the world just kind of is made new almost from scratch. But so I just keep on thinking back to that, and that there must be something to that with these entities that are being, again, now at the time of the end, unleashed. And yeah, these four angels, certainly they're up to no good.
Yeah, evil angels. And it's really amazing because that's what God does. It says, and death and hell were cast in the lake of fire. So he bound these spirits up for a reason. But in the end, that's when the final judgment comes, and that's the lake of fire. And that's where these entities, these evil angels, are going to end up going. But for now, God's going to use them to do certain things. So it's just like, when Satan appeared before God in the book of Job, he says, from whence comest thou? Oh, from walking up in the earth, to and fro in the earth. So these evil angels, they do have permission to do stuff on the earth, but the ones that are bound are there for a set time. So there's different punishments, different designations for different angels, evil angels. Well, for all of God's creation, there's a designation for something. So they're, like you're saying, they're bound up there for a time, and there it is. So we know God bounds people and spirits. They do some jail time until the final judgment, till they go on death row to the lake of fire.
So what you said is really interesting, and I've brought up here the second epistle of Peter and Jude's epistle, because they talk about these things and they shed some more light on what's going on here. Because you mentioned how death and hell are cast into the lake of fire, and that is the kind of the final judgment for all these evil entities that are wreaking havoc on the earth. They have their time. Well, some of them are bound, then they have their time, and then they go into the lake of fire. And we're going to see, of course, even Satan himself goes through a similar process. He gets bound in the earth. We'll see in Revelation chapter 20, once we get there, he gets bound in the earth, then he gets let out for a time, and then he goes into the lake of fire. The beast, who we call Antichrist, comes out of the bottomless pit, wreaks havoc on the earth, deceives people, and then his doom is to be cast into the lake of fire. And I just want to read these couple of verses. We have 2 Peter 2:4. It says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. That's what Peter said. And Jude says in his epistle, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. So
that's from the book of Enoch. That's all out of Enoch, where it talks about that.
Yeah. So again, so the ancient Jews were familiar with these things, and so this revelation is kind of backing up that stuff, that some of these stories were very real. And thus I saw the horses in division, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire, and smoke, and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt.
A lot of people have described that if you've ever seen a military aircraft that's called a 810 Thunderbolt, I believe, it's got like a 30 millimeter cannon in the front, and when it fires, it just fire proceeds out of its mouth, and they paint these faces on them. I'm not saying that, but how is John going to describe modern weaponry and a third of men killed? Well, that could be war, because it sounds like what's going to, what kind of warfare? Well, modern warfare has these kind of weapons, and they paint faces on them like lions and teeth and sharks and whatever. And then you got the thrust out of the back. If he's looking at how is he going to describe it? So he's not going to say, "Oh, there comes a jet with a long smoke screen coming out of its tail." He's describing it in what he knows from his day. So that's a possibility. I'm not saying that that's it, but it sure reminds me of one of those fighter jets like that, and they kill a lot of people with those fighter jets. And every nation has their similar type of weaponry, similar to that.
Well, that answers my question, because I was going to ask you, these 200 million horsemen, are these also demonic entities like the four bound angels, or are these people who are just making war and killing a third of the population? And I think you're saying that these 200 million horsemen, these are man's armies. Is that right?
That's what I believe, because I don't know where it says it exactly. Some of the scholars that might be watching your channel, it says tidings out of the east shall trouble him. Tidings out of the east, talking about the Antichrist. I think it's in Daniel, where they go to make war, and out of the east, what do you have? Well, you're going to have the largest armies in the east. You're going to have India, and you're going to have China. So who's going to put together a 200 million man army? It's got to be, well, I'm thinking it would be from that area.
Interesting.
Anyways, just a thought, not saying that this has to be, but it's stimulating thought.
Yeah. And I think we'll see what is possibly more of this later on, when the beast gathers together all his armies for this great battle at Armageddon. This could be kind of part of that's happening there. There could be some big wars leading up to that final war, like you mentioned Daniel, and there's parts of Daniel that sure sound like they're talking about who we call the Antichrist, and wars that he may well end up fighting. And there's going to be a lot of people under arms all around the world, so it seems. Here it's talking about 200 million, and they are really wreaking havoc on the earth. And we've seen that, in some of these major wars that earth has suffered, just the ability that we have shown to destroy ourselves with wars.
Yeah.
So it's not far-fetched.
No, as a matter of fact, it's so real. We're living in a time where they're talking about nuclear war. And it could happen. It could happen so easy, because bringing it up to right now, this present time in history, The United States and the West are not going to let Vladimir Putin, continue. They're going to stop him, try to stop him at all costs. And Vladimir Putin and the Russian people know that now. They know it. That's why the world has come to such a situation that we're living in right now. We're actually living in a time, not the final time, but definitely a prelude, a lead up. And you got these so many things going on. You got the World Economic Forum. What's that all about? It's amazing how it's all coming together. And they're actually really trying to implement what? The control, the mark of the beast. It's so clear. You could see that leading up, that within a day it could happen. Boom. I'm not saying it will happen in a day, but it's so close.
Maybe one could say you are a bit pessimistic. You're seeing all these things happening around us and you are connecting them to great tribulation and these horrible things we're reading about. But I know you also have a positive attitude because you show a lot of faith in the Lord, and you are continue to day after day take care of your little property, and you talk to the people around you, and you're blessing the people. And I think that's a great way to face whatever life throws at us, even if it's bound angels coming out of the Euphrates and unleashing war. You can still do the right thing, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time, and try to be a blessing to people.
Well, look at the men of God that went throughout history, the difficulties they went through. Look at St. Paul, what he went through. Every one of them went through some kind of trial, and we've lived pretty cushy lives, especially here in America. Mm-hmm. And I say thank you, Lord. But those that have really suffered throughout the world, the Lord must have a great reward for those people, definitely, because they've had it hard. They've had it very hard.
And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone, and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
Pretty heavy. When I read that, the way I read it in modern times, it's really something. It says, and the rest of the men which were not killed by the plagues, yet repented not of their works. They didn't change. God's trying to get them to change. That's why he's mentioning it here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That backs up what you said, that these things are happening to try to bring about repentance.
And let's see, and repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and Teslas and Cadillacs.
That's right.
And houses and big investments, all this worldly stuff. And what does the Bible say? Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is of the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. The world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever.